Hi everyone, it's me, and today, Game of Thrones, Family Bloodline, Lesson 101. Let's start.
Ha! Forget about dragons, Westeros, because the biggest threat headed your way is me. Hello, Internet! Welcome to Film Theory.
Hello Internet, welcome to Film Theory. Hey!
Where, just like a Lannister always pays his debts, a MatPat always delivers his theories. In the crazy, ever-changing world of Game of Thrones, at least there are a few things you can always count on. Winter is always coming, the Targaryens always have great hair, and no one likes Dorne. Seriously. No one likes Dorne. But if there's one thing I've learned about this series, it's that you can't actually rely on anything. George R.R. Martin's love of throwing fantasy tropes out the window like a young Bran Stark means that there is no assumption that you can count on. Which is why I'm so excited about this episode, as I finally get to target the family that we all think we know, the Targaryens. In particular, I've had my eye on the Mad King for a long time now, and today we're gonna talk about just how mad he is. Quick warning though, a light sprinkling of spoilers ahead, so I pray to the old gods that you're all caught up. Now,
Okay, so, spoilers ahead. I'm very sorry.
Season 6 of the series was the first time ever we've gotten a look at the most famous Targaryen ancestor, Aerys II, the Mad King himself. And what a looker he is. Now, there are all kinds of theories going around about the Mad King, and there are plenty of upcoming film theories about the fella, but today I'm less interested in history and more interested in whether history is going to repeat itself. Because for as excited as we all are for Westeros to get wrecked by Dany and her armies, Dothraki hordes, ships, and dragons, the biggest twist in her story may yet be coming, and sadly, nothing Sir Friendzone does will be able to stop it. Nope, Dany may have a ticking bomb inside of her. Remember, the most famous family genes in the whole series, the Targaryens, i.e. the genes that let you walk through fire, talk to dragons, and make sure you always look like a Pantene Pro V model, also tend to lead to rulers who are violent, deranged, and just weird. According to Game of Thrones canon, Aerys II was perfectly sane in his 20s, showing no signs that he had gotten the insane Targaryen genes, only to develop his homicidal crazies a little bit later in life, after becoming king. So is it just a matter of time for Daenerys as well? Can science help us predict whether Dany is destined to follow in her father's footsteps? I intend to find out. To figure it out, we need to take a look at the Targaryen family tree, and boy, is it a doozy. Now, on this show, I usually try to stick to the lore from the TV show only, since at this point the two have taken different story arcs. For this one, we needed to call out the big guns to piece together Daenerys' genetic situation. And
The big guns, where you can find all the family logs. That's a very long history.
fully understand exactly what she's inheriting, which means the lesson of today's episode is the wonderful world of inbreeding. And when I say wonderful, I mean pretty weird. Like, research for this episode was very uncomfortable. But to diagnose her likelihood of becoming the Mad Queen of Westeros, we need to understand what happens when related individuals do the horizontal mambo, and genetically why so many societies have rules against marrying into your own family.
Alright, so please remember to keep it wholesome, keep it friendly, and please remember that 7 cousins away. Thank you.
Other than the obvious creep factor, which, again, is pretty darn high. Hashtag love is love. Most of the time. Now, before Darwin and genetics, people did know that inbreeding produced kids that had physical and mental disabilities, who tended to die younger, or frankly didn't survive at all. But the reasons behind that have to do with genetic science that came out in the 1800s, specifically recessive genes and genetic mutations, and basically how many are lurking under the surface of our own genes every day. So if you didn't sleep through 7th grade science, hopefully you know that every person in the world has 2 copies of all their genes, one you inherit from your mom and the other from your dad. In textbooks, you see them sitting together in these cute little pairs, all nice and getting along, but the story in your cells is a whole lot different. One of the biggest reasons we have two copies of genes from two parents is to cover up mutations and alternate forms of genes in the genome. And what Mr. Foster didn't tell me in 7th grade science is that there are actually tons of these genetic mistakes inside all of us. So if gene 1 from your dad doesn't quite have its act together, the one on the allele you got from your mom can cover its tracks, making sure that you still produce everything that you need, like blood cells and bones and Kylie Jenner duck lips. Sometimes the traits these genes are for are just unimportant, like handedness or the ability to taste certain bitter chemicals. But then there are other genes that you definitely want to have a backup for.
You definitely have a backup for, alright? Like those kind of left-handed, right-handed, those kind, understandably, but those that you need like bones.
Diseases like sickle cell anemia and cystic fibrosis are two of the most famous autosomal recessive diseases, but there are literally hundreds more, most of which you don't really hear too much about because they're pretty darn rare. And the reason they're rare is that most people have a backup set of genes that help them minimize the effects of these disorders. Notice though that I said most. If you don't have a backup set of genes, then boy howdy, you're in trouble. Which brings us to Danny and her family history of inbreeding. Inbreeding is actually really complicated, and what we're talking about here just scratches the surface. Studying inbreeding is basically about how many genes get recycled directly from generation to generation. To do that, population specialists use what's known as the coefficient of inbreeding. It's like they make coefficients for literally anything these days. Coefficient of when winter is coming. Coefficient of extraneous boob shots in Game of Thrones. But a coefficient of inbreeding measures how many identical copies of a gene they have because it came from the same ancestor. In other words, it helps us understand how much of Daenerys' DNA is the exact same as the Mad King's because it came directly from him and his inbreeding ancestors. This, in turn, ought to give us a good indication of whether we can expect Daenerys to follow in the footsteps of his, let's just say, less than sane ruling practices. Now, the equation for calculating the inbreeding coefficient for any person is... Yeah, I'm gonna assume that you don't want me to walk through every variable on that one, so instead let's use the power of Google to see what the inbreeding coefficient would be for the children of two siblings.
Alright, so that's a very complicated equation, so thank you Google for simplifying that. Thank you.
Using Google and some weird research into dairy cow breeding, we can find that the sibling pairings will result in offspring that share 50% of their genes with their grandparents and have an inbreeding coefficient of 25%, meaning that they have a 25% chance of being affected by those nasty recessive gene diseases we talked about. And the numbers are all well and good, but to put it in perspective, let's look at a real-world example first. King Tutankhamun, known by his peeps as King Tut, is one of the most famous cases of real-world inbreeding, since his parents were actually brother and sister. He's portrayed in Egyptian mythology as this powerful sun god, but in reality, he was really tiny, likely sick his whole life, had a congenital club foot, couldn't produce any living children, and died at age 19. Plus, he's the only child from his parents that we know who actually survived. So what happened here? Well, his grandparents weren't inbred, so first off, a big pat on the back to those guys for finding love in all the right places. His parents, though, not so much. They were siblings, meaning that they already share 50% of the same DNA just by being closely related. Now, they would have been fine if they had gone on to have kids with other people, but they decided to keep it all in the family, meaning that any kid they had would be inbred. Like, really inbred. When they had King Tut, it meant that he had a 25% inbreeding coefficient because he's the product of two siblings, versus, say, a 0% coefficient if his parents weren't actually related. It also means that he shares 50% of his genes with his grandparents, where he normally would only share 25% of his genes with them under normal circumstances. As a result, his odds of getting any one of those rare genetic diseases is now as high as 1 in 4. And across so many possible disorders, chances are you're gonna end up with at least a few of the biggies. And that's the thing about the genetics of inbreeding. It's all about percent chances and playing the odds. Kind of like Vegas, but with your genes. Sure, you can definitely get lucky every once in a while if, say, having a club foot and dying by 19 is considered lucky, but statistically speaking, serious genetic mutations become common as soon as you get to a coefficient of inbreeding that's 10% or higher. So, what does this mean for Daenerys? Well, as you go through more and more generations of inbreeding, the problems get worse and worse really fast. And say what you will about the Targaryens, but they were prolific inbreeders. A little examination of that massive family tree shows that you can go back 19 generations from Daenerys, and 12 of them have sibling inbreeding involved. Talk about your brotherly love. Actually, don't talk about that. It's gross. Then again, I'm still talking about it, so welcome to Film Theory, ladies and gentlemen. So okay, let's give her the absolute biggest benefit of the doubt and only go back 3 generations to the last time that there was any sort of outbreeding in the Targaryen line. Aegon the Unlikely. Unlikely to survive based on the family's incestuous history, that is. Badoom-ching. Aegon the Unlikely managed to marry Black Betha, a real live non-Targaryen. Oh, but okay, sure, now it's a race thing. Seriously though, Black Betha's just her name. Now, Aegon the Unlikely also comes from inbreeding, but by marrying Betha and outcrossing, he effectively resets the Targaryen inbreeding coefficient to 0. According to the lore, Aegon didn't believe in inbreeding, but 2 of his kids fell in love and got married, bringing their kids, including Mad King Aerys II, up to that 25% inbreeding coefficient. As a result, it would be incredibly unlikely that either Aerys or his sister would live long enough to grow up, and they would almost certainly have no chance of having viable kids, an issue known as inbreeding depression. No, that's not the feeling you get when your sister starts having feelings for your first cousin. That's actually when most populations become sterile after 1 to 2 generations of close inbreeding, because their DNA is simply too damaged to even create a baby. But most importantly to us, the risk of Aerys having Alzheimer's and dementia, diseases that specifically show up later in life, happen at much higher rates in inbred populations. More recessive genes mean more genes associated with dementia, Alzheimer's get turned on, leading to the disease showing up more often and more severely. It also shows up earlier in life because inbreeding causes the body to literally age faster, since its DNA is too fragile and literally more likely just to break apart.
What? Oh my god, they literally die faster? Wow.
Need a real-life example? Just look at Maria of Portugal in the 1700s, whose life has some pretty bizarre similarities to our favorite Mad King. The product of royal inbreeding, she started off as a strong, decisive ruler early in life until she started having delirious episodes and developing dementia. Her condition got worse after the death of her husband and son, and she lived the rest of her life in her own mind. Those around her reported constantly hearing her paranoid shrieking and screaming. As she was going mad, her kingdom was taken over, and the whole Portuguese royal family at the time was forced to flee across the ocean to Brazil in 1801. Historically, she's been referred to as the Mad Queen. So what are Daenerys' odds of sharing the same fate as her father and Maria of Portugal?
Coincidence? I'm not too sure.
How do I put this lightly? Really freaking high. Preposterously high. Daenerys has 75% of her genes in common with Viserys and her father, Aerys II. 75%! That means that she's incredibly likely to share the exact same fate as him. When we hear Tyrion tell her that she's starting to sound a lot like her father...
You once told me you knew what your father was. Did you know his plans for King's Landing when the Lannister armies were at his gates?
This is entirely different.
You're talking about destroying cities. It's not entirely different.
It's because she literally is her father. 3/4 of her is her father. Physically, mentally, genetically, her fate is pretty well sealed. Man, it brings new meaning to the idea of daddy's little girl. Now, if you carry this out to its logical conclusion, it also has some serious implications for her position as queen. The reason her first son died before he was born? We think it was magic, we assume it was magic, but the much more likely explanation is that she's too inbred to produce a living heir. Based on genetics, it's practically impossible for her to have a living offspring. And forget about marrying her. Even if she makes it back to Westeros and reclaims the Iron Throne for her family, statistically it's almost impossible that she could extend her own family tree. There is literally no point in her becoming queen because there's so little chance that there'll be anyone there to take it on after her. Well,
and you don't forget that, well, later in the episodes, with, with his own nephew. Yeah, not good, not good.
Well, I guess there's always Cersei. But if all this seems a bit extreme, if applying science to Game of Thrones seems a bit absurd, you don't have to take my word for it. Instead, take George R.R. Martin's word. In the epilogue of A Dance with Dragons, Mace Tyrell declares that Daenerys is, quote, as mad as her father. Just a throwaway line or foreshadowing at what's to come once Daenerys takes over Westeros? We'll have to wait and see. Until then though, remember, it's just a theory. A film theory. And cut.
The perfect avocado in the supermarket!
Well, time to embarrass myself. If you go way back to the earliest videos on the Game Theorists channel, then you'll see that I used to do myself a bit of singing back in the day. Is that a wish for... I was so cute and young then. Well, in honor of this Game of Thrones theory, I partnered up with one of the best musicians on YouTube, a man by the name of Peter Hollins, and got to warg out with him as Bran Stark in his rendition of the Game of Thrones theme song. So please, do me a favor and click here to rock out with me to one of the catchiest opening theme songs to a TV show ever. He got me this really awesome costume and everything. I felt so legit. Fair warning, you'll have it caught in your head the rest of the afternoon. Or if you'd like another Game of Thrones theory, check out this one with my prediction on how Ser Jorah will be the hero of Westeros. Seriously, the guy's still kicking around. He has a big role to play in the events next season. And for all you DHMIS fans, don't worry, just need a little bit more time in the edit. That one's coming out next week. For all you Doctor Who fans, meanwhile, you might be waiting just a little bit longer. So pass the time by listening to the Game of Thrones theme song over and over again. Click there!
Very musically talented actually. He's just awesome. Do remember to subscribe and to support. Thank you so much. Alright, thank you so much for watching this video. I hope that you find this video very educational and you learn something new. Yeah. And also, yeah, if you do like this video, please remember to like, share, and subscribe to my channel and comment down below, okay? If you have anything to share with us, don't forget to follow my channel, and I sincerely appreciate all of your support and encouragement for my work. Thank you. And yeah, but hey, that's just a theory. A film theory. And cut. Thank you. And I hope to see you in my next video. Thank you so much. And please don't forget to subscribe to my channel. Thank you. Thank you so much.